Hello, and welcome to the inaugural lesson in my lecture series. My name is Dr. Holly Jordan, and today we will be conducting a deep dive into the Jewish symbolism in everyone's favorite Star Trek film. Not that one, this one, the one where James T. Kirk takes on God and wins. Yes, my friends, today we will be conducting the analysis that no one asked for. Is Star Trek V, The Final Frontier, an inherently Jewish film? As this is my introductory lecture, I'd like to share a bit about this channel. A Long Road explores ideas at the crossroads of religion, political science, and pop culture. I hold postgraduate degrees from the University of Georgia and Virginia Tech, and I present my content from the expertise of a former professor and lifelong scholar of political and cultural theory. Before we get started, I encourage you to stick around until the end of this lecture for ways to support this channel and for a preview of next month's lecture. Let's jump right into some basic assumptions I'm making of you as the audience. First, I assume you've watched Star Trek V, but don't worry if you haven't or if it's been a while, I'll be giving a brief rundown. Second, I assume you're curious about Judaism, religion in general, or how religion presents itself in pop culture and science fiction. Finally, I assume you have strong feelings about Star Trek V, because love it or hate it, there's really no middle ground on this one. There are also two terms I will be using throughout that relate to methodology, or the way in which we analyze text in religious studies. The first method is analyzing authorial intent, or what the author's intended message was with their text. We determine this intent by examining their background, biases, the historical context, and their personal statements regarding their work. The purpose of approaching a text through the lens of authorial intent is to place the text within the author's reality and the larger conversation at the time. The second method is reader response. This approach involves interpreting a text through one's own personal lens, informed by one's experiences and research. The goal is to discover unique insights and wisdom outside the author's original intentions for the work. Finally, I need to define one more term: heresy. Heresy is a religious term for a belief that does not agree with the established tenets of a religion. So, for example, let's take normative Christianity. Normative Christianity establishes that Jesus is the Son of God, equally human and divine, and he died as a perfect sacrifice for man's sins. However, Arius of Alexandria, who lived during the 3rd and 4th century CE, believed that Jesus Christ was simply a creation of God's, not God himself, and thus was subordinate to and not equal to God. He amassed followers, but Arianism was considered a heresy by the established church because it rejected the divinity of Christ. Arius himself was excommunicated from the church for this infraction. In this lecture, I will be using a reader response methodology to analyze the inherent Jewishness of Star Trek V, The Final Frontier, bringing in authorial intent when pertinent. So while it may not, or may, have been William Shatner's intent to explore the final frontier through a Jewish lens, it is possible to derive deep meaning by tracking evidence that points towards the inherent Jewishness of the film. So let's get started. Spock, Kirk, and McCoy go to Yosemite on vacation. There's beans, mountain climbing, marshmallows, and singing. Their trip gets interrupted by orders from Starfleet to head to Paradise City, located on Nimbus 3, the planet of intergalactic peace and an all-around crap hole. Think Mos Eisley meets Timu, and not in a cool way. Anyway, Nimbus 3 has been taken over by a mob, and the 3 ambassadors representing the planet have been kidnapped. The Federation decides to send the Enterprise A to respond. A broken, barely functional, understaffed Enterprise. The crew of the Enterprise find out that the leader of the kidnappers is none other than Spock's secret brother, Sybok. Well, half-brother. Weird half-brother who smiles. A lot. You know, if I had a nickel for every time Spock had a secret sibling show up. Anywho, Sybok and his legion of not actually but kind of brainwashed zombies hijack the Enterprise, hold the crew hostage, and then take them on a joyride to Shakari, the mythical planet in Vulcan tradition from which the universe was created, hidden deep within the center of the galaxy beyond the galactic barrier. To put this into modern terms, this would be like Tom Cruise brainwashing the Secret Service and hijacking Air Force One to take the president on a trip to Xenu. Pretty outrageous, but this is what we get. The gang beams down to the God planet to find an all-powerful being. God's like, how'd y'all get here? And Sybok's like, we brought a starship. And God's like, can we leave on your starship? And Sybok's like, heck yeah, we can. And then Kirk asks the most quoted question from the film. What does God really need with a starship if he's really God? And then all hell breaks loose. Literally. Because guess what? It's not God. It's a monster who's been imprisoned on the planet for the good of the universe. In response to Kirk's question, lightning shoots from the being's eyes, and Kirk goes flying. Sybok tries to defuse the situation, but Spock's not having it. Spock also questions the divine nature of the being and is rewarded with the being's Palpatine-style eyeball lightning, knocking him flat on his butt. McCoy's like, what the heck, God? Why is God so violent? And Sybok finally realizes what's happening. This is not God or Shakari. The mission that began with his exile from Vulcan has been a lie, and Sybok sacrifices himself to save the rest of the team. Spock and McCoy manage to make it out alive, but Kirk is left on the planet, fleeing from the being and hoping his ship, which has been broken the entire film, can get enough power to beam him out. Which it can't. Good job, Scotty. Quick pause here to bring up the B plot that is basically not important to the film until like right this second. Some Klingons are all mad at Kirk from stuff he did in Star Trek 3 and 4 and are attempting to murder him through the entire film. And this plotline is so lame that Kirk doesn't even really know they're trying to kill him until like nearly halfway through the film. The Klingon B story, while unremarkable, makes sense, I guess. Let's face it, if I were a Klingon trying to prove myself and some dudes jacked my fellow warrior's van, used it to time travel to the 80s, converted it into a U-Haul for whales, and then crashed the whole thing into San Francisco Bay, I probably would cross the neutral zone to fight that sumbitch too. And to be absolutely fair to the actors Todd Bryant and Spice Williams Crosby, they are some of the most believable in-character Klingons in the entire Star Trek franchise. I mean, come on, just look at them. Look at them. They did so much preparatory work for this film, both in terms of their fitness and learning to speak Klingon, and it shows. It's just too bad they didn't get a story worthy of their skills and preparation. However, this B-plot is, as I said, so unremarkable that the only reason I'm bringing it up is because it's important for the, hey, trick ending! Spock guilts the Klingons into letting him use their ship to save his stranded captain. And in a scene absolutely lacking in subtlety, especially given the entire film is an exploration of God, Kirk is Deus Ex Machina'd off the God planet, and Spock and Kirk bro hug in front of the Klingons in one of the best spurk nods in the entire franchise. And if you don't know what that means, I will not be held responsible for what you find when you Google it. Finally, everybody ends up back on the Enterprise for a big party. Kirk and McCoy saying nice things about Spock's terrorist brother. The trio then returns to Yosemite to finish their shore leave. They reflect on their journey and realize that at the end of the day, God really is the friends they made along the way. Amen. So let's start by putting this film into the context of religion in Star Trek, broadly speaking, and take a closer look at authorial intent. Gene Roddenberry, the creator of Star Trek, intentionally excluded religion from the daily life of a Starfleet ship. A humanist who had rejected his Southern Christian upbringing, Roddenberry infused the Federation and Starfleet with his own humanist values. David Alexander, when interviewing Roddenberry towards the end of Roddenberry's life, defined Star Trek and TNG's humanism as the belief that, quote, human beings can, with critical thinking, solve the problems that are facing them without any outside or supernatural help, which Roddenberry, as a member of the American Humanist Association, wholeheartedly agreed with. Roddenberry didn't want religion to be a day-to-day part of his universe, and yet Star Trek does not shy away from storylines including religion or religious motifs. The relationship between God and man is addressed first in the third aired episode of the original series, Where No Man Has Gone Before. In this episode, Captain Kirk's best friend Gary Mitchell, who, along with Dr. Elizabeth Denner, is infused with godlike powers after being exposed to a force wave. Mitchell uses these powers to harm others, leading to his death by Kirk's hand. The moral of this episode is that gods have no place in the humanist world of Star Trek. Notably, religion continues to be explored throughout all the series and films, but it is something rarely, if ever, practiced by humans. The few examples we have of humans practicing religion are relatively minor. In Star Trek Generations, Picard attends a Christmas party with his family. In the TNG episode Data's Day, Miles O'Brien and Keiko Ishikawa's wedding blends elements from traditional Western and Japanese marriage traditions. And in Strange New Worlds, Captain Pike prays over Captain Batel as she fights off her Gorn infection. But most of the time, religion is practiced by non-human species and is presented both positively and negatively. On the one hand, you have positive representations of religion as seen through the worship of the prophets of the Bajoran faith, the practice of the monks of Boreth in the Klingon traditions, and the way of absolute candor practiced by the Qowat Milat Romulan religious order. But more often than not, religion in Star Trek is presented as negative, backward, and often cultish. Examples include the cult of the Pa-Wraiths in Deep Space Nine's episode Covenant, Elixis community in Deep Space Nine's Paradise, Garth of Izar's cult of personality in TOS's Whom Gods Destroy, and the violent computer simulation featuring the clown in Voyager's The Thaw. Enter into the mix Star Trek V. Far from a fan favorite, The Final Frontier stood for decades as the lowest rated Star Trek film of all time. The release of Star Trek Section 31 has saved it from this bottom ranking, with Star Trek V coming in on Rotten Tomatoes at 22% compared to Section 31's 20%. You know, now that I'm thinking about it, it may have been a mistake to start my lecture series with Star Trek V. Plagued by production challenges, a limited budget, heavy influence from Paramount executives, and significant rewrites occurring during filming, the film struggles to get its message across and to find its way to a satisfying finish. However, the film is, at its core, in my opinion, deeply Star Trek, as is shown through its ever-present humanistic philosophy, namely that the universality of goodness resides not in godlike beings, but instead resides in the human or sentient heart. Situating Star Trek V within the franchise's history is important because it helps us understand how radically it departs from what has come before. So let's start by looking at the primary antagonist of the film, Sybok, son of Sarek. Sybok is a Vulcan by birth and a heretic by choice. Unlike normative Vulcans, he embraces his feelings. He believes it is the emotions we suppress that define us and hold us back from our potential. These beliefs are at the core of his heresy and ultimately what lead to his exile from Vulcan. Throughout the film, he repeats a mantra which encapsulates his entire message. Each man hides a secret pain. Share it with me and gain strength from the sharing. Sybok heals people using a combination of his charisma and telepathic skills to unearth their deepest pain and lead them towards acceptance. Sybok's goal is to travel through the galactic barrier to the center of the galaxy. According to Vulcan legend, this is the location of Shakari, the planet from which all of creation emanates. Sybok leads his army of followers to steal the Enterprise, whose first officer is conveniently his half-brother Spock, and together, Sybok, his disciples, and the Enterprise crew travel together through the barrier. Through the ensuing scenes, Sybok uses his powers on the bridge crew, including Uhura, Sulu, Chekhov, and McCoy. Spock, Kirk, and Scotty manage to evade Sybok's passive coercion. The tragedy of Act 3 and Sybok's mission is that the planet he finds is not the Vulcan Garden of Eden. It is a prison planet imprisoning an evil being with incredible powers. Sybok realizes his hubris only at the very end, and he sacrifices himself, fighting the being to allow the rest of the away team to escape. Sybok dies, but in his final moments, he stays true to himself, asking the being to share its secret pain. Back aboard the Enterprise, the crew discuss what they've just experienced and recognize Sybok's sacrifice. Kirk, Spock, and McCoy then turn to a discussion of the existence of God. McCoy asks, "Is God really out there?" To which Kirk responds, "Maybe he's not out there, Bones. Maybe he's right here, in the human heart." The ending is deeply humanist, and as explained in the 2004 Blu-ray commentary, this thesis is the core of William Shatner's vision for the film. Others involved in the writing of the script removed Kirk's assertion that God resides in the human heart multiple times, but Shatner insisted it be kept. It is this insistence on God's residence in our hearts that made me think harder about Jewish symbols and concepts within the film. Shatner himself, along with Leonard Nimoy and Harve Bennett, both of whom had strong influence on the script, are all Jewish, so this may have lent itself to the Jewish imagery that permeates the film. Writers, intentionally or otherwise, create from within their own worldview and experiences, and in this case, it shows. Jewish symbols, beliefs, and rituals inform and shape the look and the message of the entire film. All right, let's start with some Jewish symbols in Star Trek V. First, let's look at clothing. Sybok's unique attire immediately distinguishes him within the film. While his robes adhere to traditional Vulcan design, they feature a striking addition, a chest piece adorned with stones, jewels, and precious metals. They are a simpler, more humble version of his father Sarek's ceremonial robes during his brother Spock's Fall Torpan ritual, which, as you can see, are accented with gilding and large precious stones. These details echo the priestly garments of the Israelite priest Aaron, Moses' brother, which are described in the Book of Exodus. These ancient Israelite sacred vestments, including a robe or ephod, incorporate a breastplate crafted from metal and 12 distinct jewels, each representing one of the 12 tribes of Israel. This garment sets Sybok apart from others in the film, who wear either the ragged robes of the poor, Starfleet's monster maroon uniforms, or the formal clothing of ambassadors. The garment gives Sybok a sense of authority, along with his charismatic grins and larger-than-life speech-making. And yet their difference from traditional Vulcan ceremonial robes set him apart as different, giving us a visual reminder that he is not a normal Vulcan. Second, let's talk about the Tabernacle. Among the most enduring symbols of Judaism is the Tabernacle, which served as a movable sanctuary from the period of the Exodus to the building of the first temple in Jerusalem roughly 500 years later. Like the Israelites, Kirk, McCoy, Spock, and Sybok make a pilgrimage through the desert. As they approach the being, a sanctuary arises from the earth. A series of finger-like stone pillars rise from the ground to create a worship space around them. The space, which is described in the script notes as a cathedral, is dark and sinister, adding to the prison-like quality of the being's world. By the end of the film, this tabernacle does not stand as an enduring symbol and collapses along with Sybok's dreams. The Hamsa is a symbol of protection in both Judaism and Islam. It appears as a hand with two thumbs. Coming from the Arabic word for 5, referring to the number of fingers, it is said to ward off evil and symbolizes the hand of God. In Vulcan culture, there is also a symbolic hand gesture used as both a greeting and a blessing. This symbol, imbued with the ideals of live long and prosper and peace and long life, was first introduced in the Season 2 original series episode Amok Time. The Vulcan salute is intentionally Jewish. Leonard Nimoy explains in his memoir, I Am Spock, that he borrowed the symbol from his Orthodox Jewish upbringing. The gesture, known as the Kohanim blessing or priestly blessing, is used during the Jewish high holidays, an annual period of self-reflection and reconciliation with God. It is understood that in this moment of the service, the holy essence of God enters the sanctuary. It is also present in many forms of Jewish iconography and often appears on Jewish headstones. What makes the use of the salute in Star Trek V notable is that it is the only time we see Vulcans join hands with the salute. Just before Sybok dies, he raises his hand in the salute. As scripted, Sybok alone performs the salute. However, in the scene as filmed, whether by Shatner's direction or Nimoy and Luckenbill's acting decisions, Spock also raises his hand in the salute. Sybok and Spock then join palms, their hands mirroring in the two-thumbed Hamsa. This is remarkable, as Vulcans rarely touch in public. This is an intimate moment, made even more intimate given McCoy and Kirk are there to observe. By affirming this symbol of protection and by warding off evil, Sybok enters his final confrontation with the being under God's and his brother's protection. All right, now let's move on to some higher concepts and beliefs within Judaism that enrich our understanding of the film's message. First, we have the motifs of desert wandering and pilgrimage. The book of Exodus in the Hebrew Bible tells the story of the Israelites' flight from Egypt and the subsequent desert wandering. It is a pivotal period in the development of Judaism. While wandering in the desert, God forges a covenant with the Israelites, whom he has led out of bondage in Egypt. God gives Moses, their leader, the 10 Commandments and other worship practices and rituals that would define Jewish beliefs. In return for their worship, God pledges protection and the establishment of the Israelites as a nation. This pilgrimage through the Sinai is commemorated annually through the holiday of Pesach, or Passover. Sybok's origins begin in the deserts of Vulcan. Like Moses, Sybok has a brother in the form of Spock, who has been a part of Sybok's journey since before Sybok was exiled from Vulcan. However, unlike Moses, Sybok is a heretic within the Vulcan community, and Spock is forbidden from contact with him. Sybok's power is based in emotions, and the half-human Spock's parents believed Spock would be particularly vulnerable to Sybok's heresy. Like Moses encountering God in the desert, Sybok comes into direct contact with a godlike being. Just as Moses is permanently altered from seeing God's face, Sybok's visions turn into horror when the being reveals its true evil nature by turning into Sybok himself. Remaining consistent with his character, Sybok approaches the being with empathy, seeing it as something in pain who needs help. Sybok's pilgrimage ultimately fails, ending with both his and the being's death. This mirrors Moses' fate as well, as he also never reached his promised land due to his past hubris. Second, we have the belief in the importance of the family you choose. The Hebrew Bible highlights the importance of family by choice through the story of the Moabite woman Ruth. Ruth marries into an Israelite family and then quickly is faced with the death of her husband. She must choose between returning to her birth family or staying with Naomi, her mother-in-law. Ruth chooses to remain loyal to her chosen family, demonstrating unwavering commitment in one of the most beautiful passages of the entire Hebrew Bible. This loyalty is met with reward. She becomes an ancestor of King David, the first ruler of unified Israel, and is honored as a mother of the nation despite her Moabite origins. The dynamic between Spock, Kirk, and McCoy exemplifies the theme of chosen family, particularly when contrasted with Spock's relationship with Sybok. Twice in the film, Spock faces a choice between his brother and his crew. Initially, when Sybok seizes control of the Enterprise, Kirk commands Spock to shoot Sybok, a directive Spock disregards, leading to the trio's confinement in the brig. Spock remains dedicated to his ship and to his captain. The second instance arises after Sybok reveals Spock and McCoy's secret pains. Despite Sybok's second invitation to join him, Spock rejects Sybok's call and aligns himself once again with Kirk and the Enterprise, reaffirming his commitment to his chosen family over his biological one. Kirk, Spock, and McCoy's bond is paramount. Their moments together in the film are bookended by scenes depicting the trio on shore leave, time they could be easily spending with their own family and friends. Instead, they opt for a camping trip together in Yosemite National Park. These campground scenes are the heart of the film, revealing the depth of the trio's relationship. The dialogue in these scenes, fueled by their strong connection, grounds the narrative far more effectively than any of the action sequences. The bond shared between Spock, McCoy, and Kirk is not unique among the crew. Chekhov and Sulu also engage in joint shore leave, a rare moment of camaraderie between the two within Star Trek. Although later abandoned in Star Trek VI, there's also a hint of a romance between Uhura and Scotty. However, if you disregard the romance, their interactions are still affectionate, highlighting their long friendship. Across 2 series and 4 films, this crew has forged familial ties, with connections surpassing those they hold with their own biological families. Next, let's turn to the importance of nonviolence and the preservation of life at all costs within Judaism. These principles are so fundamental to Judaism that they supersede other commandments when a life is at stake. For example, let's say you're out walking on the Sabbath and come across someone who is gravely injured. Within Jewish tradition, one is not permitted to perform work on the Sabbath, and for Jews on the more conservative end of the tradition, this includes driving. However, if you are the only option to get this person to the hospital, driving in this case is permissible and not considered a sin because the preservation of life supersedes the prohibition of work on the Sabbath. Gene Roddenberry's vision for the Federation was a society that championed nonviolence and the sanctity of life. Starfleet's phasers, the main weapon used in Star Trek, are used often as a tool rather than a weapon. As an offensive weapon, the stun setting is utilized far more frequently than its lethal counterpart. The Vulcan nerve pinch was conceived by Leonard Nimoy as a morally sound, painless method for neutralizing threats. Starfleet and Federation leadership consistently prioritize diplomatic resolutions before resorting to force, even when facing formidable adversaries. The Federation's official policy is one of non-aggression and non-intervention in inter- and intraplanetary conflicts. Essentially, when at its best, the Federation and Starfleet operates as a diplomatic and peacekeeping entity in addition to their scientific mission to explore and document strange new worlds. Starfleet only serves as a military force as a last resort. Gene's vision remained consistent in the original series, the first 5 films, and TNG seasons 1 through 5. It is only after Roddenberry's death that imperfections of the Federation really begin to be explored, as is seen most dramatically in Deep Space Nine. Sybok becomes the antagonist of the film, largely due to his vacillating use of violence. He uses threats of violence to capture the Enterprise, but once aboard, he states that violence is the last thing he wants. On the other hand, Sybok is not completely without violent propensities. His mission is, in part, achieved through coercion. While he states that he does not control minds but frees them, he also explains that he frees minds by, quote, making you face your pain and draw strength from it. Not inviting you, making you. Those he helps truly seem to have their pain taken away, but the process itself is permeated with violence. Violence is also the action that leads to the unmasking of the being. When the crew begins questioning the being and his actions, the being responds by attacking Spock. When in turn McCoy states that the being cannot be God due to this violence, Bones too is attacked. Kirk presses on with their interrogation of God by asking, why is God angry? Ultimately, the party rejects the being as God because God simply cannot use violence and still be God. Sybok respects the sanctity of life so much that, without hesitation, he sacrifices his life to save his brother, the Enterprise crew, his followers, and ultimately the entire universe. The next Jewish tradition presented in Star Trek V is questioning faith. Judaism is a religion with questioning at its heart. One only needs to watch Fiddler on the Roof to see this tradition in practice. And in Judaism, if a human being brings up a good point to God that he has not considered, God has been known to take the advice of humans and change his mind. After all, the relationship between God and man in Judaism is a covenant, or a legally binding relationship, with responsibilities on both sides of the relationship. In Exodus 32, Moses is up on the mountain receiving the 10 Commandments. His brother Aaron commits sacrilege towards the one God of Israel and coordinates with the Israelites to build an idol for worship, a golden calf. God is infuriated. After all, the 10 Commandments begin with, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt. You shall have no other gods before me. Meaning, God is the only God. God is so angry that he commands Moses to leave him so that he can kill all the Israelites. But Moses knows this is wrong and, quote, implored the Lord his God and said, O Lord, why does your wrath burn hot against your people, whom you brought out of the land of Egypt with great power and a mighty hand? Why should the Egyptians say, it was with evil intent that God brought them out to kill them in the mountains and to consume them from the face of the earth? Turn from your fierce wrath, change your mind, and do not bring disaster on your people. Remember Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, your servants, how you swore to them by your own self, saying, I will multiply your descendants like the stars of heaven, and all this land that I have promised I will give to your descendants, and they shall inherit forever. And the Lord changed his mind about the disaster he planned to bring on his people. So Moses' questioning of God leads directly to God changing his mind. Questioning God is also present in Star Trek V. When Sybok and the senior crew land on the God planet, they are presented with God as he is traditionally visualized in each of their cultures. However, this God morphs quickly into the stuff of nightmares. When it finds out that Sybok has arrived on a starship, it demands passage on the ship, prompting James T. Kirk, as stated earlier, to ask the obvious question, what does God need with a starship? It's a valid question to ask of a supposedly omnipotent being who should just be able to warp himself off the planet. The being responds by attacking Kirk, prompting Kirk's question, why is God angry? This violence causes Sybok to question the legitimacy of this being as God. He exclaims, stop! The god of Shakari would not do this! And it makes sense that Sybok begins to question whether this being is God based on the violence he has witnessed. This violence is entirely in opposition to both what Sybok has believed in and demanded of his followers, and to Sybok's non-violent Vulcan upbringing. Violence has no place in religion, thus the being cannot be God. Next, we turn to traditions associated with death and grief. While Sybok's robes for most of the film mirror the ancient priestly vestments, when Sybok, Spock, Kirk, and McCoy travel to the God planet, Sybok changes into simpler robes and cuts his hair to meet his deity. These white robes, a Vulcan style we saw Spock wear in Star Trek 3 and 4, are far simpler, evoking another Jewish sacred vestment, the kittel, a plain white robe worn by observant Jews during a Passover Seder, Yom Kippur, their marriage ceremony, and in death. In preparation to meet God, Sybok puts on this robe, appearing as the penitent man, the man making things right with God, on this his Day of Atonement. What Sybok does not know is that he is about to die, and that his kittel will have a far deeper significance. He finds that the universal deity he has been searching for his entire life, the beliefs he held so strongly that he was exiled from Vulcan, and his brother Spock, are false. It is the end, the death of his journey. However, it is not the death of Sybok's ideals. As he approaches the being, he brings to the being the same compassion he has held the entire film, and makes a final request of the being, to share its pain. Let's also turn now to grief and mourning. Grief is a communal activity within Judaism. For instance, the afternoon service during Yom Kippur, the Jewish Day of Atonement, centers on remembering those who have passed away during the previous year. The names of the dead are recited during the service to honor their lives, and grief is shared between the mourners and the community. The main tenet of Sybok's theology is that individuals are held back from happiness by not being able to let go of their pain. Sybok creates a community of those liberated from their pain, and as a community, they support their savior. In the case of Dr. McCoy, his grief around the death of his father has haunted him, and the liberation from this pain seems to bring McCoy closure. Sybok is able to do all of these things by creating a community that shoulders the burden of grief and mourning together. In the final scene on the Enterprise, the crews of the Enterprise and the Klingon bird of prey, as well as the liberated ambassadors, come together to celebrate and to mourn. While not explicitly referred to as sitting Shiva or as awake, Spock is clearly in mourning, with his two friends supporting him. Later, as Spock, McCoy, and Kirk sit around the campfire once more, Spock acknowledges his mourning, but seems to be moving on from it by gaining strength from his friends. Finally, and in my opinion most central to the arguments of this lecture, is Judaism's understanding of the nature of God, especially within its mystical traditions. Judaism, like many world religions, has within it a mystical sect. Known as Kabbalah, Jewish mystics move beyond the letter of the law and the physical world to discuss deeper truths about the universe. Kabbalah's most important work is the Book of Creation, written between the 3rd and 6th centuries CE in Palestine. As you probably guessed, the book of creation contains within it secret wisdom about, yeah, you guessed it, the creation of the universe. These beliefs evolved over time, and in the 12th century, Moses de Leon of Spain popularized the Book of Splendor, a separate Kabbalistic text written in ancient Aramaic, which offers a commentary on the Jewish scriptures through allegory and metaphor. Central to the tenets of Kabbalah is the symbiotic relationship between God and humans. Kabbalah defines God as Ein Sof, or without end. Ein Sof flows through all of creation, which is broken down into 10 attributes, or sephirot, which are represented as vessels. These attributes of God include wisdom, love, and strength. The last of these vessels is Shekhinah, the feminine presence of God in the world. This feminine aspect of God combines with the male aspect to bring completeness to the divine, the endlessness inherent in Ein Sof. When these aspects of God converged, the light of God was too powerful and shattered these vessels. These shards of light fell to existence and were trapped, meaning that God is now incomplete. Each human holds within them a shard of this light. Through living good lives, lifelong learning, and repairing the world in which we live, human beings bring these shards of God back together so God can once again be whole. Or, stated another way, God is present in the human heart. This is the entire thesis of Star Trek V, which Shatner fought tooth and nail to retain. Through living good lives, finding community, going out into the world and doing good, we bring the spark of the divine to the universe. By recognizing the pieces of God in one another, we become closer as a species. The being could never have been God because there is no light within the being. The being brings pain and suffering, not joy and goodness. And Kirk, Spock, McCoy, and Sybok can recognize this because of the pieces of light within them that do not respond to the being, metaphorically speaking. What really makes me believe in the intentional use of mystical Judaism in The Final Frontier is a telling quote from William Shatner himself. In 1995, upon visiting the Western Wall in Jerusalem, one of the holiest sites in Judaism, Shatner remarked on the experience stating, quote, "I am here to absorb Jerusalem and Israel and to take a look at my heritage. I think that it is so mystical and marvelous. It beckons everyone in the world, particularly Jews, to come here." Shatner embraces the mystical elements within Judaism. So, of course, Kirk's answer to McCoy's question about God is that he is present within all of us. It is a belief directly from Judaism and believed by Shatner himself. All right, let's begin to move towards the so what of this lecture. Why analyze this film so deeply, especially from a Jewish perspective? The answer, in part, is Star Trek V's legacy on the franchise. For one thing, Star Trek V has had a lasting legacy in subsequent Star Trek series and films, starting with the original series film Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country, and part of this legacy has been its religious message. The final film featuring the core 7 officers from the original series, The Undiscovered Country explores the possibility of a lasting peace between the Federation and the Klingon Empire, an allegory for the impending fall of the Soviet Union. Spock is one of the main architects behind this historic cessation of tensions, standing in direct opposition to the feelings and prejudices of the rest of his crew and Starfleet more broadly. Each of the main characters has a moment where they must confront their negative biases as they pursue a fragile peace. In Star Trek VI, Spock plans to retire and chooses Valeris, a new Vulcan character, to take his place on the Enterprise. However, Valeris betrays Spock by being involved in the assassination of the Klingon High Chancellor Gorkon, which puts the peace process at risk. Spock and Kirk eventually figure out Valeris' connection to the assassination, confirming their suspicions. In my opinion, one of the most uncomfortable Spock moments during the Nimoy years is his interrogation of Valeris on the bridge. Spock questions her, and Valeris immediately obfuscates, infuriating Spock, who forcibly grabs her arm to hold her in place and begins a mind meld. She struggles, so he grabs her again, anchoring one hand at the base of her skull to force the meld. As he presses to learn the location of the peace conference, Valeris struggles once more, and Spock deepens the meld by gripping his other hand into her face. Valeris begins to shake and then wail in pain. The camera cuts away to Scotty, who is noticeably disturbed by what he is watching. Spock finally backs off when he realizes that Valeris does not know the location of the conference. Even so, she is still shaking, and the camera shifts to Uhura, who, like Scotty, is deeply upset by what he is seeing. While it is clear that Spock is emotionally compromised throughout the scene, the fact is that Spock is the aggressor. He is not simply doing his duty as a Starfleet officer, he is exacting revenge for her betrayal. His mind meld is violent. He does not seek her permission, nor does he invoke the "my mind to your mind" mantra, which would make him equally vulnerable. Spock mentally assaults Valeris in a way that is far more violent than any of Sybok's mind melds. This scene gives us a small glimpse into why Spock was forbidden to interact with Sybok. If Spock has even half the power of his brother, and this is the result, it begs the question, how powerful could Spock have become with the proper training? The scene stands as proof of his parents' concerns, that Spock's half-human side, combined with a loss of logic, could lead to a powerful Vulcan even more misguided than Sybok. At the very least, I suppose, Spock owns his failure. He admits to Kirk that it was, quote, arrogant presumption on his part that got them into this situation, and that he was, quote, prejudiced by Valeris' accomplishments as a Vulcan. It is this word, arrogance, that ties Spock back to Sybok. Sybok, too, admitted his arrogance and vanity had led to the suffering in Star Trek V, and Spock admits that his arrogance has lent itself to Valeris' ability to so easily sabotage the peace process. Spock does not, however, acknowledge the violence of his actions, only that he was responsible for them. Kirk reminds Spock that at the end of the day, he alone is responsible for the actions of the crew. Spock pushes back, and Kirk returns to his beliefs from Star Trek V, that there is a spark of something connecting all of us, regardless of race. Kirk states, "Do you want to know something? Everybody's human." Spock responds, "I find that remark insulting." Kirk grins, replying, "Come on, I need you." Kirk consistently posits that an inherent unique goodness resides within everyone, a characteristic that defines all sentient beings. And while Kirk may use the limiting language of humanity, as is called out by Spock's mostly but not completely kidding response of, "I find that remark insulting," Kirk's theological stance from Star Trek V remains unwavering. A unifying spark exists within us all. By uniting, we collectively restore the universe's inherent goodness. We also see the damaging consequences of the beliefs of Vulcans without logic in a later series, Star Trek Enterprise. In the Season 1 episode Fusion, the Enterprise encounters the Vatash Kator, an unconventional group of Vulcans known as Vulcans without logic. They interpret Surok's teachings differently, advocating for a balance between logic and emotion rather than the complete suppression of emotion. Their leader, Tavin, is presented as a kind, curious, and not at all violent Vulcan. However, T'Pol, the Vulcan member of the Enterprise's crew, refers to their beliefs as both dangerous and reckless. A tense exchange occurs between T'Pol and Talaris, a member of the Vatash Kator. Talaris is assertive, challenging T'Pol with heated words fueled by strong emotions. He urges her to abandon her nightly meditation and instead to explore her dreams. T'Pol describes her dreams that night as unsettling due to her lack of meditation, yet Talaris persists, suggesting they perform a mind meld together. In contrast to the original series and all subsequent iterations of Star Trek, Enterprise portrays Vulcans as so deeply suppressing their emotions that mind melds are considered perilous and its practice is forbidden. Talaris' mind meld with T'Pol constitutes a forceful, non-consensual invasion of her mind executed against someone lacking the defenses and preparation for such an attack. Furthermore, Talaris' language during the meld is incredibly violent. Typically, a mind meld involves the repeated phrase, "my mind to your mind, my thoughts to your thoughts." This invites vulnerability from the initiator, opening themselves to the recipient. However, Talaris inverts the standard syntax and forcibly extracts thoughts. Your mind to my mind, your thoughts to my thoughts. He seizes what he desires rather than accepting what is freely given. This is not at all the same as the ministry of Sybok. While Sybok's mind melds are intense, they are done with the recipient's permission. Talaris may use some of the same tactics as Sybok, but he does not seek to liberate others from pain. He exercises his power to cause it. Talaris is presented as a problematic Vitash Kator, but he is not presented as so exceptional as to stand in opposition to the heretical philosophy of these Vulcans without logic. Talaris is presented as a problematic Vitash Kator, but he is not presented as so exceptional as to stand in opposition to the philosophy of these Vulcans without logic. The end of the episode leaves the viewer with the conclusion that all emotional Vulcans are misguided at best and evil at worst. And then we have Star Trek Strange New Worlds. Taking place 28 years before the events of Star Trek V, the Strange New Worlds episode The Serene Squall revisits Sybok, a character absent in Star Trek since Star Trek V. In this episode, Angel, the captain of the Serene Squall, disguises themselves as a Federation doctor on a medical mission in order to infiltrate the Enterprise. Angel's real objective is to free their husband Zavarius, who is being held at a rehabilitation center for Vulcan criminals. As the events of the episode unfold, Spock realizes, along with viewers familiar with the Final Frontier, that Zavarius is actually Spock's brother Sybok. Spock tells Nurse Chapel that he was warned to steer clear of Sybok, an exhortation directly pulled from Star Trek V. Spock also labels Sybok, like the emotional Vulcans in Star Trek Enterprise, as Vitash Kator, Vulcans without logic. The episode concludes with Sybok seen from behind and clad in his Star Trek V robes, hinting at a potential return in the series. So at the end of the day, regardless of the perceived quality of and lack of love for Star Trek V, Sybok has remained an influential part of the DNA of Star Trek, made possible only through William Shatner's vision. At the core of Star Trek V is the question, who or what is God? Both James T. Kirk and William Shatner unequivocally state that whatever God is, it lives in the human or sentient heart. Looking at the film through a Jewish lens only adds to the spirit of the film. Using the ancient concepts and themes of Judaism to better understand God and the crew's place in the universe helps us to understand our own place within that universe. So if that analysis makes me an apologist for this film, well, I suppose I am. I mean, after all, this has been my phone background for like the last 4 months. So yeah, I love this film. I always have. It's impossible not to laugh at Spock struggling on horseback and Kirk encouraging him to be one with the horse. McCoy's stream of conscious rant regarding how stupid Kirk is to be free climbing El Capitan is hysterical. While hacky as hell, the scene where Scotty walks directly into a bulkhead. It's delightful, especially when you realize that James Doohan did that stunt multiple times onto an unpadded floor. And say what you will about Uhura's fan dance, it's perfect. She looks stunning, and she's so clearly having fun. And nothing is better than Chekhov and Sulu's buddy comedy hike, where Chekhov, the navigator, has to admit that they're lost. And Kirk, in the brig, sitting on the first regulation toilet we have ever seen in Star Trek, is just ridiculous in the best possible way. So what's my ultimate so what here? Well, as a B'nai Mitzvah practicing Jew who holds academic specializations in biblical and Hellenistic Judaism, it's impossible for me not to see Jewish imagery when it's presented in media. Connecting this film with my religious tradition only serves to enhance my love for and appreciation of it. It provides me with a way to engage many parts of my identity at once. The so what for me is that I now have even more connections between my faith and a fandom I love so much. I hope this lecture has given you something meaningful as well. And that's it. Please go ahead and leave a comment on what you liked, what you didn't like, or just what you're thinking about. In the coming weeks, I will take some of your comments and respond to them in my office hours videos, which will serve as companion pieces to the lecture series. Special thanks to the friends who have helped me go through so many drafts of this first video in my series. I love you all, and I appreciate you so much. If you've enjoyed what you've learned here today, or if you just want to be a nice person, please like and subscribe. For bonus material and a great community, join us over on Patreon. And be sure to follow us on Instagram and Blue Sky for trailers and upcoming videos and other cool content I've been coming across in my research. All of these support options are in the video notes below. And now, the moment I know y'all have been waiting for, next month's lecture topic. Join me as we take a closer look at the Star Trek Prodigy Season 1 episode All the World's a Stage, where we will consider what the Enterpriseians can teach us about oral traditions and the literalism of sacred texts. So if you've never seen the episode, or it's been a little while, dig out your Blu-rays because Season 1 of Prodigy just got dropped from Netflix. And I don't even want to talk about what's going on over at Paramount. Thank you so much for joining me on this inaugural journey down a long road. I hope you enjoyed getting from there to here with me. Be well, y'all, and stay safe out there.